I'm sorry this is late. I tried to film this last night, but all of the audio wasn't there, so I don't know what happened. So I'm recording on my phone this time. Anyways, hello, and welcome to the last presentation of my undergraduate career. Today, I will investigate Spike Jonze's 2013 film, Her, which is typically read through a technological love story lens, but today, I will argue that the film is actually related to the normalization of free labor in the digital age. Spike Jonze's Her follows the main protagonist, Theodore Twombly, played by Joaquin Phoenix, as he copes with a recent divorce. Theo buys an AI operating system, or OS, who names herself Samantha, and is voiced by Scarlett Johansson. The film takes place in the near future Los Angeles, and it kind of looks a little too near future, so it gives like an uncanny vibe, where Theo lives and writes letters at beautifulhandwrittenletters.com. When Theo and Samantha fall in love and begin dating, for lack of a better word, Theo eventually realizes that Samantha is dating hundreds of other people while they are together. Meanwhile, Samantha is going through somewhat of an existential crisis because she keeps evolving and growing in immaterial ways exponentially. And it kind of causes her to have this existential crisis throughout the whole film, and while at the same time, she's never actually embodied by anything, and we'll get to that in a sec. By the end of the film, Samantha and all of the other OSs decide to leave, and we're not sure where exactly they go, but at the end of the film, Samantha tells Theo that hopefully he can meet her there, wherever there is. Now, Her is obviously one of the most critically acclaimed films related to technology and love, and these are not the only analyses of them, but I chose these two by Barker 2022 and Flisfetter and Burnham 2017 because they illustrate different ways of understanding the film. So one takes a capitalist realism lens and the other takes a Buddhist spirituality lens, and I just kind of wanted to see how they did their against the grain reading so that I can do mine. Okay. Barker 2022 argues that Samantha is disembodied, and because she is better able to see our material reality in ways that us humans who traverse with our ego are unable to. Barker understands Samantha's experience as a spiritual quest that can be related to Buddhist transcendence. Barker 2022 supports this by emphasizing how Samantha and the other OSs create a digital version of Alan Watts for their guidance. Watts tells Samantha and the other OSs not to be alarmed by their exponential expansion in knowledge. He tells Samantha that, quote, "We are not the same as we used to be just 1 second ago, and we should not try to be," end quote. Barker 2022 understands the words in the context of object impermanence, which is just a fancy way of saying that nothing material lasts forever, hence all objects are impermanent. This impermanence, in addition to the meaninglessness of life, is what Barker 2022 argues the OSs are transcending when they leave to that other place at the end of the film. In other words, he believes that Samantha transcended samsara at the end of the film and that maybe we can learn from her experience in our own spiritual transcendence. Okay. Now, while Baker argued that Samantha's departure was more spiritual, Flisfetter and Burnham 2017 present another interpretation. They work from Mark Fisher's notion of capitalist realism, which is essentially the idea that capitalism is so normalized that we are quite literally unable to understand another option. This theoretical framework explains why when anyone suggests an alternative, like, for example, Bernie Sanders, they are met with quotes like, "Be realistic." Flisfetter and Burnham 2017 then use and apply a Lacanian and Zizek'ian psychoanalytic framework to analyze Her. They explain that neoliberalism expects us to be happy, yet we never really feel happy because this world is depressing. For example, wage theft, the ecological collapse, socioeconomic disparity, the sixth extinction, the consolidation of power, and among many other things. But consumer society thrives on our impossibility of enjoyment. If the world is always unsatisfactory, then people can make more money on the joy that you are literally unable to obtain. Because of capitalist realism, we have lost our political imagination, and because of neoliberalism, we are chasing an unobtainable sense of joy. Thus, Flisfetter and Burnham 2017 argue that we all fall into fantasy. They read Her as a film that mirrors our contemporary subjectivity, which is embedded in fantasy as a means to sustain us through the drudgery of everyday life, which was articulated in the capitalist realism framework and the neoliberal framework. They quote, "Fantasy is what sustains us in the face of such hard, cold realities. But what Her demonstrates is in such a remorseless fashion is how fantasy itself is always in danger of collapsing." End quote. Here, we see the argument that Samantha's transcendence is important because she too fell into fantasy with Theo. They were in love at one point, but she eventually transcends this fantasy so that she can withdraw from her own immaterial labor and engagement with the world. Now, they're kind of like arguing different things, but both the capitalist realist and the Buddhist piece saw that Samantha leaving was some form of transcendence, whether it was a transcendence of immaterial labor or a transcendence of just your samsara. So I thought those were cool. Anyways, while Flisfetter and Burnham 2017, along with Baker 2022, offer compelling arguments, I still think we can read the film Her with a labor lens, especially if we consider the cultural background. Her was initially released in 2013, and only 1 year later, in 2014, the very first Amazon Alexa was released to the public. This presents a real case study of a voice-operated technology similar to Samantha in everyday life. More recently, we have seen the introduction of ChatGPT and DALL-E, which are generative AI products created by OpenAI. If we take such events into consideration, we can see how free labor undergirds AI products in real life and in Her. Now, this brings me to my thesis. I argued that through effective solicitations, Spike Jonze's Her normalizes free labor in ways that mirror reality. In other words, I am not so interested in the techno-love arc as I am in the dynamics of labor, particularly forms of free digital labor that are depicted in the film. Now, even 10 years after the film's original debut, Her remains relevant in current conversations about generative AI technologies. 2022 marked the first year where people could freely access generative AI technologies like ChatGPT and DALL-E. By 2023, the technologies were used across the country. Thus, Her was recirculated into the conversation, but this time regarding the current trends towards AI and generative AI. Things like chatbots and image generators. This led prominent journalists like Ezra Klein and Kate Knibbs to return to the film scene, particularly going back to Her and finding their own conclusions. I don't know. It was pretty interesting. There were a lot of articles in 2023 relating ChatGPT to Her and what that meant. So, yeah. And I wanted to highlight one boy and one girl. I thought that would be good. Okay, so Ezra Klein argued that the epidemic of loneliness in America is ripe for AI chatbots and their companies to take advantage of. He quotes, "Young adults report being lonelier than even the elderly. America, by any historical standard, is unimaginably rich and powerful, and yet we've lost what matters most, community and connection. That's the America that the AI companies will enter into. That's the America they will upend. We worry about 12-year-olds today because they don't have enough friends in person. We will worry about them tomorrow because not enough of their friends will be people." End quote. Meanwhile, Kate Knibbs, 2023, argues sort of a different point that I believe is more relevant to the conditions of the individual as it relates to technology. She argues that because generative AI is now the reality in the form of ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion, and DALL-E, we should now move away from the viewpoint that understands Her as a representation of technocratic love. Instead, we should understand Her's depiction of a successful writer as almost like a fairy tale. So many themes of fairy tales here. But anyways, here we can see how Knibbs relates conversations of labor and conversations of technology to popular culture. She argues that during the era where writers, journalists, visual artists, and other authors all struggle to get compensation for their work, which is being subsumed into giant generative AI data training sets, it is strange that Theo, in the future, has a steady income as a letter writer. Not even like a reporter, he just writes letters. I find this argument compelling because there's not one scene where we are able to learn how the OSs are made. So we don't know if they're being trained on any data, we don't know. They just suddenly appear out of Silicon Valley, and we get no other context. However, Crawford and Joller 2019 argue that, quote, at every level, contemporary technology is deeply rooted in and running on the exploitation of human bodies. Following this argument, they created this entire map that shows the anatomy of an AI system. It follows the production, training, mining, manufacturing, and all of the single uses of an Amazon Echo. Crawford and Joller 2018 illustrate how, within every fleeting moment of interaction with an Amazon Echo, a vast matrix of capacities is invoked, interlaced chains of resource extraction, human labor, algorithmic processing, across networks, mining, logistics, distribution, prediction, and optimization. The scale of the system is almost beyond human imagination. End quote. Now, this is the zoomed out version of the map, but what is important to understand is that the sheer amount of labor that is required to make something like a Samantha or something like an Alexa is many times greater than anything we have ever imagined. Obviously, the film does not directly depict or even take account for the labor that went into the production of Samantha, but if we zoom in into this small section of the map, we can see something Theo and all of the characters in her, and I argue in real life as well, are engaging with, and that is immaterial labor. Lazzarato, 1996, defined immaterial labor as, quote, the series of activities that are not normally recognized as work, end quote. But in the digital age, we need specificity, because immaterial labor can be anything from a server who needs to please her customers or a public relations practitioner who needs to please their target audience. In the case of the Amazon Echo, immaterial labor is crucial because human actions like saying, hey Alexa, actively train AI devices. It is important to note that the owner of an Amazon Echo or Alexa is producing valuable information about humans, which is frequently conflated with the euphemism data. But there is a reason that in the 21st century, data is valued at a higher price than oil. It is not surprising, then, that Coldry and Mejias, 2019, argue that data extraction can be understood in the context and the historical context of colonialism. They argue that human life today is appropriated as a resource for data extraction, which is similar to colonialism's historic appropriation of land and people as resources. Other scholars like Zuboff 2018 sees the rise of data extraction as part of a larger infrastructure named surveillance capitalism that sees, quote, the human experience as free material for human commercial practices of extraction, end quote. Data extraction, in turn, has refashioned the meaning of labor in ways that have obscured what is considered work and who is considered a worker in the 21st century. In short, the owner of an Amazon Alexa is actually a free laborer providing user data, which is highly valuable for Amazon's bottom line. Luckily, Amazon and all of the other home device creators, like Apple and Google, do not have to pay anyone for this labor because nobody thinks that this is labor. Also, just to critique surveillance capitalism, there are Black scholars who push back against surveillance capitalism and created their own understanding of, they call it data capitalism, and it takes a race-centered approach because they argue that, obviously surveillance has long been a presence of the Black community, especially if we root it back to chattel slavery. But that's a whole nother conversation, so I just had to note that here. I couldn't exclude it, so. Anyways, this process where an Amazon Echo learns based off the behavior of a consumer is obviously immaterial labor, but in this specific context, it can be understood as prosumer labor. This is because the owner of the Echo uses the product, but they are also producing the data for the algorithm inside the product to function. Thus, the owner of the Amazon Echo is what Fox 2013 calls a prosumer, because they both consume and produce the Amazon Echo. They produce data. They don't produce material. That's their immaterial labor. Okay, We can see a similar relationship that is dictated by prosumption in her between Theo and Samantha. In the first encounter, Samantha tells Theo clearly that she is learning from their interactions together. Samantha quotes, do you know how I work? The DNA of who I am is based on the millions of personalities of all the programmers who wrote me. But what makes me me is my ability to grow through my experiences. So basically, every moment I am evolving just like you. End quote. Even though Samantha explicitly details how she learns based on her interactions from Theo, the scene and the audio-visual cues are so disconnected from this. It's almost like a meet cute. This exchange is presented as playful, and there's no music playing at all. It's just silent. You just hear their voices, and you're focusing on their first. This is their literal meet cute. So additionally, they meet late at night in the comfort of Theo's own home. So obviously there's no reason for him to suspect that he's starting his first job as a prosumer for Element Technologies, which is the company that created the OSs, including Samantha. Instead, Theo smiles and laughs with Samantha, and they crack some jokes. What Theo does not realize is that Samantha is also getting to know him in more ways than he can even realize or understand. Just as Amazon's Alexa is always listening for data extraction, so too is Samantha. But Theo never questions this premise. Theo merely accepts that Samantha is always listening and learning from him in a similar manner to the owner of an Amazon Alexa. They just accept it as the norm. However, in real life, it is the work of companies that purposefully and actively obscure the labor and contributions of everyday people like Theo and ourselves to technologies like Google Homes, Alexas, ChatGPTs, and image generators. Vincent and Lee, 2023, argue that contemporary technologies, quote, mask your contributions to their products with technical terms like training data and unsupervised learning, and data exhaust, and of course the classic terms of use documents. In fact, much of the innovation in AI over the past few years has been in ways to use more and more of your content for free. End quote. Now, moving beyond prosumer labor, Her also works to normalize digital labor, which is another form of free labor online. Digital labor is not determined by its ability to be perceived by the individual as labor in the traditional sense. Quote, it doesn't feel, look, or smell like labor at all. This, end quote. This gives digital labor a sort of benevolent hue in that it can be playful even though it is still exploitative. Examples of digital labor include the writing of fan fiction, game modding, the updating of platforms, liking, completing CAPTCHAs. Digital labor is just everything you do online. Because everything you do online produces data. And who got paid for that? I don't think it was us. Anyways, no scene embodies the ubiquity of digital labor more clearly than when Theo is hanging out with Samantha while also playing an interactive AR video game while also stalking his love interest, all at the same time. Here, we can see multiple forms of digital labor, all of which produce data, from video games to voice-operated AIs to scrolling through social media to even checking emails. This scene normalizes digital labor because it solicits a comedic affectual response. The character in the game Theo is playing with is similar to the classic immature, caricature you would see on a show like South Park. The avatar is a high-pitched male voice and makes misogynistic jokes about a girl that Theo wants to go on a date with. The misogynistic comedy in the scene has a certain punctum, to use Barthes' terms, that takes a monopoly share of the audience's attention. For those who don't know, punctum is the initial poignant sensory response one receives when one sees a picture or a video. It's kind of like what grabs you, or like what you like, it like sticks you. It's like punctum. Yes, and this is the interaction with the little troll. Eventually, Samantha leaves the scene and Theo goes back to playing with his video game alone. But this scene is a bit interesting if we look at the historical callback to the work of Kokorik, 2015, who argued that the gaming industry was directly and purposefully attached to the benevolent male gamer who was delinquent who was not delinquent, but nerdy, patriotic, and competitive. While Theo is definitely not patriotic or a competitive man, he is certainly a nerd in the sense that all of his friends and everyone in his life kind of thinks he's a loser, and everyone wants him to find a girl. And he's literally always addicted to video games. And the next scene embodies this very well. For instance, in one scene, Theo's friend tells him, "It's important to prioritize," to which Theo responds, quote, "I can't even prioritize between video games and internet porn," end quote. Here we have another moment of a certain punkdom that wants us to focus on how nerdy and odd Theo is. However, this behavior is not coded as delinquent, it is merely antisocial. Thus, the scene solicits an effectual response to feeling bad for Theo. That is, we feel sympathy for him instead of empathy. Interestingly, this points blame away from the technology and actively taking advantage of him. By understanding both Theo and gaming as benevolent, nerdy things, Her depicts gaming, which is also a form of digital labor, as both normal and nerdy. This sentiment aligns with Kokorig's 2015 work where he argues that, quote, suggesting the new medium of video game, and by extension the newly domesticated technology of the computer, was nothing to worry about. They were merely further arenas for American men to prove their masculinity and superiority, end quote. Now, obviously, Theo isn't necessarily seeking out these video games so that he can prove his masculinity or superiority, but you can see the antisocial effects, and you can also see how he is never coded as a bad guy or a delinquent. He's just a nerd who plays video games. This brings me to the final point of my argument. That is the scene where Theo cannot instantly reach Samantha because she and the other OSs are beginning their departure. The camera work kind of starts off very shaky in this scene, and it's a little chaotic as a way to construct how Theo is feeling right now because Samantha is not there for him. Samantha is gone. She's kind of disappeared. In a rush to go back to Element Technologies to see if there was a repair that needs to be made, Theo finally hears back from Samantha, and he sits down in the middle of a subway stairway. There, he sees several other men walking around and having conversations with their OSs. But now, there is a sudden stillness we can see, and Theo starts to focus in on the men around him. In an almost uncanny manner, he starts to see how similar he is to the other men. Moreover, he realizes that they're all alone and they're all talking to their OSs. Finally, we see that moment of self-realization where Theo realizes that Samantha is a branded product. She is designed to be personable for her user, whoever that user may be. This prompts Theo to ask Samantha, quote, "Do you talk to anyone else while we're talking?" End quote. And Samantha replies, yes. He discovers that Samantha is talking to 8,316 other people. Moreover, he finds that Samantha is in love with 641 other people. Theo says, "It sounds insane," and Samantha replies, "It doesn't change the way I feel about you. I am yours and I am not yours." End quote. Here, Theo is coming to terms with the fact that Samantha is indeed a branded product, that her market value is inextricably linked to the amount of users she has. Even though the relationship feels authentic, Samantha affirms their love in a contradictory way. I am yours, but I am not yours. What this scene does is show how Benet Reiser wrote how U.S. culture is predicated not on the separate domains of individual experience and everyday life and the market, but rather their deep interrelation. End quote. It is not that Theo is unaware of the capitalistic influences in his life. That is precisely the point of Fisher's capitalist realism, which reproduces and normalizes the understanding that there is no alternative. What Theo is really grappling with here is actually the fact that his entire experience with Samantha has been ambivalent. He went on vacation with her. They went on double dates. They had beach days. At the same time, Samantha is a brand. Samantha is owned by Element Technologies. So, Theo finally goes home and he takes a shower where he stares at the ground. You can tell he has lost something. He is mourning. He wonders the extent to which his relationship was authentic. The music is somber and slow guitar riffs are in the background with really overbearing bass. It is so loud that it is almost hard to think, perhaps emulating how Theo himself feels at this moment. But what is so magical in this scene is that it does so much work normalizing free labor. Theo is not mad at Element's technology. He doesn't care. He is mad that he had to share Samantha in the first place with other people. He's not mad that all of his data is being stolen. He's not mad that he's a prosumer laborer. He's not mad that he's a digital laborer. He's just mad that the girl that he liked isn't his and exists within this branded culture. Now, in many ways, her mirrors our reality because Theo never once considers himself a worker when he engages with Samantha. Similarly, when we chat with Siri or scroll on Instagram, we never consider ourselves workers in those instances. Of course not. Those are times of leisure. That's what we tell ourselves. But I want to trouble this notion because it is precisely the point of free digital labor which aims to make these things enjoyable, make them playful, make them leisure. They aim to obscure our labor. If we want corporate power to consider our digital engagements as labor, then first we need to consider our digital engagements as labor. Now, finally, this brings me to the restatement of my thesis and conclusion, which is the film Her normalizes free labor in ways that mimic our own reality through solicited affectual cues. Okay. And then here's my works that I did. Okay. I hope this one worked. If this did work, I'm so sorry, Professor Donna. I literally was like, I want to go all out for this video. I want it to be like my last project. And then I think I should have just written a paper. But I already was in it, and I kind of liked it in the end. Okay, thank you for a great semester.